Hello, everyone. Um, it's Monday afternoon. At least it is now. It may not be whenever you see this. And I'm taking a short break. I've been crazily busy because I'm flying out to Death Valley tomorrow morning early, and I have to be all packed and get up at 3 a.m. tonight and drive out of the driveway and get myself down there. But I wanted to share a few more thoughts that I've had over this last week and see where they go. And the first thought is I want to share is about trauma and the incredibly big. It's a big buzzword now. It's we could call it this. This is the decade of trauma. And probably about 3 weeks ago, I was taking a walk with a friend of mine, and I hadn't seen him for, oh, it had, oh my God, probably it had been 2 years or so since seen him, and I asked him if he was still doing a certain kind of work, and he said no, and I said, well, how come? And part of it had to do with personal reasons, but he also talked about, oh, the amount of trauma that was coming up as he did the work. And I inquired more about it. And he really spoke about, oh, that so many people who came to his workshops brought their trauma with them, and the trauma was emerging in the middle of the work. And then he was getting triggered by it, and his trauma was becoming active, and he, once he got on this subject, he really got on a roll. I mean, we probably walked for 10 minutes, and he was talking constantly, and then he was referring to trauma and brain chemistry and learning all about brain chemistry. And now that we know about brain chemistry, we have a little more of an access or a little more of a window into what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and at some point, I just stopped him. I interrupted him because I was just getting overwhelmed. So I'll call that data point one. Another thing, I have a friend, a good friend who I've known for, I'm going to say, you know, I met him probably 50 years ago, and we've been pretty good friends for at least the last 30. And oftentimes when I go talk to him, he's older than I am, and he talks a lot about his birth trauma, and a lot of his focus is on, oh, how to address his birth trauma and how it comes up, and he's doing certain therapy having to do with, um, actually it's very hard for me to understand, but it's supposed to in some way change the way his brain responds. And so here he is, a man older than me. He's in his latter part of his 70s, and he's still focusing on something that happened at his birth 76 years ago. Um, And one other thing I want to mention is there was a man who enrolled in the Mythic Warrior this fall, or actually he enrolled, but then he never really came. And in as he was writing to me before coming, he was just explaining what was going on in his life, and again, it was almost like uh, he talked about, oh, that he had finally gotten in touch with the trauma that happened while he was in the womb. Evidently, he was part of a twin, and his twin sister died, and there was this kind of miscarriage, and he was working with a therapist to go into that, and they were doing regressions and various other things. And he was very excited, saying it explained why his whole life he'd felt like there had been something missing. And and the something missing was, of course, the his twin sister, or the spirit of his sister, and he felt like that now through these regressions he was realizing that uh, she was still here, she was always here, and he could contact her, and and so he shared all this, and and he was going to come to this uh, 8 weekend men's program, and you know I I'd known him, I'd met him 20 years before when he'd done a vision course with me. And then as the time got closer, he wound up dropping out before the first weekend, basically feeling like the intensity of the work they would uh, do would be too much for him, because dealing with all this trauma, he was in such a vulnerable state that it just wouldn't be healthy or feel safe for him. Um, and as some of some of you are familiar with Gabor Mate, who's who is right now considered one of the world's experts on trauma, and he talks about um, the conditions of modern life, the number of people who are depressed, who are anxious, who feel alone, who feel troubled, feel like they're not living their full, authentic life. And he attributes most all of it to trauma. And and another very popular teacher these days is a man named Thomas Hubel, who who again works with trauma, but in his case, not only is it we've gone way past childhood trauma, and even back past birth trauma. Now he talks about ancestral trauma, intergenerational trauma, and collective trauma. The trauma that we all experience, even though it happened to other people generations before. It's somehow that it's in us. So here we are. We're in the we're in the trauma field.